Well, as we've been reporting this morning, 2 years ago the government was advised that raising the accommodation supplement could push up rents. At that time the idea was shelved, but in last week's budget an increase of up to $80 a week for some families was announced. Let's talk about this further with the Prime Minister Bill English, who's in the Wellington studio this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Susie.
Why the U-turn?
Well, it's not a U-turn. I mean, Treasury made a statement earlier on that it could. We came to the view that for the families concerned, they're a bit less concerned about microeconomic refinements of theory and more concerned about the cash pressure on them, particularly for those who are spending a very high proportion of their income on housing. Now, I'm advised that since then some actual research has been done, because it hadn't been done before, by MSD, and it didn't find any evidence that landlords capture it. Now, in the long run, of course, more houses on the ground, greater supply of housing is going to make it much harder for any landlord to put the rent up if that's what they want to do.
How quickly, though, are those houses going to come on stream to make a difference here? Because surely a private landlord's simply going to be able to look at the people who are in their rentals and think, oh, I could probably get a bit more money out of them.
Well, some of them have been putting rents up in recent times in any case. But the houses are coming. I mean, we've got this biggest house building boom that we've had in many decades going on right now. So they are coming.
They are coming, but that's the point, isn't it? That they're not here yet. And so people will be able to put the rental up. There is still a relative squeeze on the rental market. Certainly in some places that's pretty chronic. And landlords are going to be able to put this in their pocket.
Well, there's no more reason why they can put rents up. Now than there will be after the 1st of April next year when this comes into place. In any case, I think if we look at it from the family's point of view, if they are in very high rents, paying a high proportion of their income in rent, they will welcome the additional support. I mean, the alternative is to not increase the accommodation supplement, and I think that would be much more criticised than putting it up.
But isn't this it exactly, that it's election year and you want to be able to be seen to be putting money in people's pockets? Now, I appreciate that doesn't come in until April next year, so this is dependent on re-election, but it is a way of, at this stage of the cycle, looking like there's an awful lot more money being dangled there in front of people, potentially, isn't it?
Well, it's a way of dealing with a pretty reasonable issue that has created some real stress in these households. The rent accommodation supplement, as we've said, hasn't been adjusted since I think 2005 and based on 2003 rents. So now we've got the capacity to make the adjustment, then we're doing it. It's great to have those positive choices.
If this isn't going to be a good thing for landlords, why is it that landlords are celebrating this?
Well, you'd have to ask the landlords. I mean, our focus is the families, not the landlords.
We will be asking the landlords shortly after 7:30, but nonetheless, Facebook posts, for example, being put out saying that this is a good thing, that seems a pretty obvious indicator about what's happening, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of people say it's a good thing. Even the Greens and New Zealand First, or opposition parties, are saying it's a good thing. So, look, it's meeting the needs of the families, where if there's an argument around the landlords, that's, as I've said, a result of housing supply issues, which we've been much canvassed, and as housing supply grows, there's less likelihood of any landlord being able to put the rent up at any stage.
How can you be sure that tenants are going to pocket this cash?
Well, we will be as sure as we are with anything else. If we pay greater working for families, are the supermarkets going to put up the price of Weet-Bix? Well, they may or they may not. What we do know is that if the families, if we don't make these changes, those families remain under pressure, and there's no possibility. But I think as I'm advised, the only people who've actually done research on this is MSD, and they couldn't find any evidence that the changes in 2005, when it was last changed, flowed to the landlords rather than the families.
So how exactly can you be confident that rents won't rise? And for example, if rents do go up, perhaps by 20, 30, 40, up to $80 and swallows up all of that accommodation supplement, are you saying that you'd do something to redress it? And if so, what?
Well, look, the landlords are in a market. They don't have the choice of just banging up the rent to any number they can think of. I think that's a pretty unrealistic proposition. As we've said, the research that's been done says it doesn't flow through.
But what would you do to redress it if that happens?
Well, we're not expecting that to happen, and we're not expecting to have to take measures in any case. We're not headed for rent controls.
But Stephen Joyce did say if rents rose, you would address it. So is that saying that there would be a cut?
Well, if rents continued rising in some dramatic fashion, then it may be families will be back in the position that they're in at the moment, where some of them pay far too high a proportion of their income on rent. That's what we're trying to redress. Now, in the longer run, or even in the shorter run, the market effects on rent mean that landlords can't just pick a number. And look, it would be pretty silly for us to say, in case a landlord does it, let's not provide this support to those families. And I think if you give the families the choice, they'd rather take the risk.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. The Prime Minister, Bill English, in the Wellington studio. It's now 28 minutes to 8.
And before 8, we'll be discussing this very